Hello everyone and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k guides. I am Brady and today I would like to talk about some updates and clarifications the guys from Frontline Gaming have put out regarding the ITC. Mainly some clarifications and updates to the way the terrain will be treated, and a new code of conduct for players and tournament officials at ITC events. For those of you who aren't aware, Frontline Gaming is the organization that created the ITC and the missions and rules that are used in the ITC format. I figured I'd make a video about the update to inform you guys and gals just in case you haven't seen or heard about them yet, and in case you plan on attending the LVO or any other ITC event following the LVO, since the LVO and most ITC events will adopt these changes. With that said, I've been getting a lot of questions on if I'm going to be making videos covering the new formations and the changes the chapter approved, or even a new tier list. And to answer those questions, yes, I'm going to be making videos on all those subjects, so look out for those in the future. I know I'm kind of late to the party with covering those subjects, since you can find other YouTube channels covering them already, but I've had other priorities lately to take care of first, but I can assure you that those videos will be out eventually. I just can't promise when. Hopefully you guys and gals are okay with this, as I just wanted to give you an update on that situation. So anyways, with that said, this video was sponsored by themagnetbaron.com. TheMagnetBaron.com offers magnets of all sizes that you can use for transporting your models easier, or even being able to change the loadouts on your models. They also make movement trays and have magnetized flight stands, so if you're looking for anything magnet related for the hobby, then be sure to check out TheMagnetBaron.com. I will have a link in the description. So now let's get into the updates for terrain in the ITC, and then we will move on to the new code of conduct for players and tournament officials, or tournament organizers, or whatever you want to call them, TOs for short. I will have timestamps in the description of this video in case you want to skip ahead, so check that out if you only care about one topic or the other. So for those of you who don't know, the ITC uses some house rules when it comes to terrain. They also use some unique terrain that had some wonky interactions within the game. In this update, they clarify on how to use these rules properly so that you don't get these wonky interactions in your games. So let's jump right into that. Here we go, the Lvo Terrain Guidelines. Terrain is one of the most important parts of a miniatures game, but one that is sometimes tough to standardize since so many of us have slightly different terrain interpretations based on local traditions. Additionally, as we have terrain that is in many cases significantly different than what players can be used to in their local areas, we wanted to roll this guidance out to set a common understanding for how we choose to play terrain rules at the LVO in order to facilitate fun and fair games. You can read the LVO Itc General Terrain Guidelines here. So anyways, they get into it a little bit here. I'm not going to read all of this, I just wanted to read that part. So they clarify that there's two different types of ruins. There's normal ruins and they have enclosed ruins. And this was causing some problems, and even on my channel when I posted a video about this that kind of showed the wonky stuff that you can kind of do with enclosed ruins, there was a little bit of backlash from the community. So they've clarified how these work and what they are and how they're different. So if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, it's in my video where I review the finals match from the SoCal Open that was played recently, where one player hid all of his Astra Militarum infantry inside of an enclosed ruin, which protected him from shooting, because the ITC uses a house rule where you can't see through the bottom level of ruins, which is something else that they clarified down below. So anyways, if you want to check out that video too, go check it out. It shows some great tactics on how to win games using these ITC rules and with their terrain that they are going to have at the LVO and other big ITC events. So anyways, with enclosed ruins, units with the fly keyword may not end their movement inside of an enclosed ruin unless they would normally be able to pass through the walls of a ruin if they did not have the fly keyword, such as infantry. So this means units with the fly keyword can no longer just move inside of an enclosed ruin unless it's also infantry. And the reason this being is because here's an example of an enclosed ruin. It's a big building that has a top and everything, but if you didn't know, they make it so that these can be taken off and you can actually put your models inside the building. But at the SoCal Open, what they were doing was just placing models on top to make it convenient and easy, because it saves time, especially when this game takes a long time to play. So the reason this changed, this might actually upset people because they're like, oh, well, now jet bikes can't go in there and blah, blah, blah. But this was kind of needed because what you could do is you could fly something like a flyer inside of this building and it's protected from shooting because it's hiding inside the building. Where realistically, like a Storm Raven or something shouldn't be able to just fly inside this building. It makes no sense. So that's why they made this change, is so you can't just put a flyer inside of this building to protect it. So those are the initial thoughts I have, is yeah, that's why they changed that. It kind of does suck for, like, so you can't charge with jet bikes anymore going into these buildings, so it just goes even farther, helping infantry be protected inside of this thing, because now only infantry can actually go inside here, which goes back to the video that I made about the SoCal Open, where the infantry were pretty much immune by hiding in there, which some people think is a bad thing and some people think is a good thing. Where I stand in that regard, in my opinion, for how they are treating this terrain, I kind of like it, but I kind of dislike it. I like the idea that troops are being buffed and being made to be special, because for a long time there, at least in early 8th edition, troops didn't really matter. It was just spam the best units that hit the hardest and you win the game. Now they're trying to emphasize the importance of having troops. So if you do plan on going to the LVO or any other ITC event, then try to make a list that's based around troops, because you're going to need to get inside of these buildings to kill stuff that's hidden inside of it and stuff like that. Especially because you can't shoot through the bottom level of ruins. So yeah, you're going to need some infantry based lists when you're playing in the ITC format. If you don't have infantry and you're just spamming a bunch of vehicles and stuff, well, that's in a way kind of your fault, because you're not building towards the mission, which is something I even state in my how to build a competitive list, is that you should always tailor your list based off of the missions and the event you're going to be playing at. And so it's good that they're clarifying this now, so now before the LVO you can actually tailor your list to have more infantry to go in here. So if you build a list that doesn't have infantry and you get stuck in a position like that where you can't kill some guys that are hiding inside the building, then it's more or less your fault because you knew about the changes ahead of time. That's basically the big change with enclosed ruins, is stuff with the fly keyword cannot go inside these ruins. And then they give another example. This does not count as an enclosed ruin because it doesn't have a roof. So you could still put a Storm Raven like right here inside of it. So that I agree with, because a Storm Raven can fly over top and then you can just place it here, whatever. Yeah, so that's still fine. But when it comes to a ruin or a building like this, then only infantry can go inside of those. So again, make sure if you're going to the LVO or any other ITC event to have some troops in your list that can actually do this kind of stuff, because it's going to be very important. Another thing I can see is jump pack units being very good, because jump pack infantry, they can jump from building to building to building and get immunity until they get close enough to actually charge and hit some stuff. So be aware of that as well. They also state too in this little part right here that if the building has a big enough hole that your model can actually fit through, then they can fit through it. If they can't fit through it, then your model can't. So in this example, the knight can actually fit into that ruin because he can fit through this big opening. But if it was another thing, like this thing, your knight probably wouldn't be able to get there because he'd have to walk over these walls or through these walls, which is not something that a knight can do. So be aware of that as well if you plan on bringing a bunch of big models with no infantry that can actually get inside of these buildings. So again, in the ITC, it's going to be very important that you bring infantry in your list. Then they clarify other things and how like these do not count as a ruin, but they count as buildings that can be entered. And how they clarify it is if it's something like this and it has a door or a window, then infantry can go inside of it. But that's it, only infantry yet again. So then you move down, so there's a door right there, there's some windows or some vents, I guess you could call them windows, whatever you want, so guys can go inside there. Same with here, there's probably a door like right there, there's some windows right here, so infantry can go inside that as well. But then you come down and you get this thing, like a Necron obelisk type thing, and people can't go inside there. Now this is very important because at the last LVO there was actually a very big controversy because one player did what I was talking about earlier, where he had jump pack units jumping from building to building with immunity and then going and attacking people. And one of the judges at the LVO actually ruled this as being a quote-unquote ruin, so the Blood Angel player was hiding his jump pack units inside of this thing, which realistically shouldn't happen. So they're stating that this type of terrain is no longer enterable, but terrain like this that has a door and windows, you can put your infantry inside. So I like that clarification so we don't get the same controversy that we had at the last LVO, which I think is very important. So then we move down and they clarify the bottom level openings rule, where you can't see through the bottom level of ruins. So basically in a nutshell what they state is windows and doors you can't see through. So like it shows here, all these windows would technically be see-through, but because of their house rule that they're doing, you can't actually see through these windows and ruins. And the reason for that is because true line of sight is very strong in this edition, and gun lines are super strong as well. So if you don't have anything that blocks line of sight, and when you look at most Games Workshop terrain and Warhammer 40k terrain in general, it's made to be more beautiful than it is to be functional when it comes to a competitive game. So we have to make these house rules to be able to make it a little more balanced so that some armies don't just get shot off the table on turn 1 because there's nowhere for them to hide, because everything you can just kind of see through it. So they clarify that it's only the windows and doors that you can't see through, but like if you were to go to the back side of this, you can obviously still see through the bottom level of that part because there's no windows or doors and it's just a big opening. So big openings don't count as being blocked, but windows and doors do. But they also state too, just in case you're unaware of what constitutes being closed and what isn't, just talk about it with your opponent like you should always do at the beginning of your game. Talk about what each terrain piece actually is and how those terrain pieces are going to work, so that way you can't neither of you have like a gotcha moment in the middle of the game. You guys talk about what it's supposed to be and its functions at the beginning of the game, so that way no one's surprised and it's a fair game for everybody. So that's how they're treating the bottom level of ruins with some clarification, so I like that as well. Then here's another change that I really like. So for a while there, because Games Workshop said that wobbly model doesn't exist unless you can actually make your model stand by itself without falling over. So in this example, if these Necrons are charging these Marines, they technically wouldn't be able to because there's nowhere up here where you could put their base without them falling down. So you wouldn't be able to declare wobbly model and get some charges off, which was kind of dumb, but at the same time I kind of liked it. I was on the fence with it, but they are going back, or at least the ITC is, they're going back to the old way, where as long as you can put a tip of your base on there, you can declare a wobbly model, and then you just put your models underneath or the closest spot to where they're actually supposed to be, and they'll count as being up here. So units that are on top of ruins like this, or even a barrel, they show it up here on a cargo container and stuff, they're not immune to charges anymore. So that's really nice. It's helping close combat armies because they do kind of need it, especially in regards to this. If you have a pure combat army, then there's no way you're ever going to get up here. But that's also why I said in videos you need to bring some shooting and some psychic, because you could always like smite a couple of these guys down or shoot a couple of these guys down and then charge up there. But yeah, now they're just making it easier for pure close combat armies, which I think is a good thing because some people enjoy playing the game with only pure combat armies. So yeah, now wobbly model exists for if you're putting a model up here and you want to get into combat. And same thing with the containers and stuff. So you can't just put a guy on a barrel anymore and suddenly be immune. You can now have wobbly model where you can actually get into combat. See, that box won't save you now. I like the humor. So yeah, and then they talk about hills and how hills are supposed to interact with each other, and that's about it. So those are all the terrain changes from what I can see. So because of all these clarifications and changes, as long as you took the time to read into your mission pack, because these will be included in mission packs when you go to an event, then it's really on the player now if they get surprised by something, because the information is readily available for you. So yeah, this should clear up all the problems, but there most likely will be some people that still get upset at the event because they didn't take the time to read the whole package and didn't understand how the terrain at these events are going to be used. But if you watch this video, well, now you know how this terrain is going to be used, and you can be prepared for it. So overall, I like all of these new changes and clarifications, and like I said, if you plan on going to an ITC event like the LVO or anything that's following the LVO, I would say bring infantry that can get inside of this type of building, otherwise you're going to have some problems dealing with stuff hiding inside the buildings. So that's it. Overall, again, I like all these changes and clarifications. So now let's move into the Itc Code of Conduct. Before I get into the Itc Code of Conduct, there's a couple of things from here that I feel like pointing out first that I think are big things. So the first thing is that this Itc Code of Conduct, I think it's very good and holds a lot of weight, because all of the people that are contributors to putting this together are all highly reputable people in our community. So it's not like this was just made by like one or two guys. This was a lot of people that like run big events and even run the ITC. They got together and made all of these rules. So I think that makes this this document hold a lot more weight and that it should be taken seriously. So keep that in mind when I'm going through all of these rules, that yes, this was written by a big group of people that all are very highly reputable in our community. So keep that in mind. And the second thing I want to talk about before we jump right into everything that this Code of Conduct has to offer is one line that I actually skipped over in my original recording, so I'm coming back to record it now because I think it is extremely important. So yeah, here it is. Players are accountable for their mistakes. and penalizing or reporting an opponent who doesn't give you a mulligan or a takeback is grounds for a foul. So what this is trying to say is, it's okay if your opponent doesn't allow you to take back your mistakes. So let's say if you forgot something in the psychic phase and moved on to your shooting phase, and you ask your opponent, oh, I forgot this spell, can I go back and do it? If your opponent says no, then that's okay, and it's not a foul on them for not allowing you to go back. They're just playing the game by the rules, and that's what this tournament and what this code of conduct is trying to do, is keep everybody on the same playing field and playing by the rules. I know that may seem harsh to some players who maybe are new to the game, or maybe just aren't that competitive with the game and they only get to play once in a while, but this is a competitive tournament. There are big prizes on the line, so if you make a mistake, then please just own up to it. Don't get upset at the people that won't allow you to go back and fix your mistakes. So I know I actually just made a video about this the other day that was saying that in the early rounds of tournaments, it's okay to allow your opponent to have some takebacks and stuff if they seem like a fairly new player and everything, and I still stand by that. If that person wants to allow you to have some mulligans and have some takebacks because they notice you're a new player, maybe you told them you're a new player, maybe this is your first tournament ever, maybe you've only been playing Warhammer for a few months, then that's okay, they can do that. But if they don't want to allow you to have any takebacks, then please don't be upset by them, because that person might be trying to play to win the whole tournament, and in that case they need every point that they can get, and they need to actually try to win their games by a large margin, so that way if there's any tiebreakers later on in the tournament, they can actually win the tiebreakers. And with all of that said, let's say you are in a game where you've made multiple mistakes and your opponent hasn't allowed you to have multiple takebacks or even any takebacks. If you report that person to a judge, you can actually get a foul yourself for reporting the player for basically playing the game by the rules. So if a person isn't allowing you any mulligans and stuff like that, that is not grounds for reporting that person. So like I've said multiple times, just own up to it, live with it, try not to make those mistakes again. So when you're at the tournament, bring your A game, don't make any mistakes. Practice before the tournament. Try to remember all of your rules, because again, this is a competitive environment and this is meant to be played at a competitive level. It may seem harsh, but that's the way it is. And it's not like this rule was written by some whack players or win at all cost players. Like I stated in the earlier part, this was actually written by a bunch of highly reputable people in our community, and this is the way that they think that the game should be played when it's at a competitive event. So just know this going into the event, practice, study your rules, and you shouldn't have any problems. And if you do make a mistake, just own up with it and try not to make that mistake again. So with all that said, let's move on and talk about the rest of this code of conduct. Okay, so now we're going to get into the Itc Code of Conduct. I actually already recorded this part, but I went through literally everything, and the video was going to be way too long. So instead, I'm just going to kind of summarize everything, and I'm going to put a link to this down in the description so you guys can come read everything for yourself. And if you do plan on attending the LVO or any Itc events following the LVO, I highly recommend you read this, because there's a bunch of little things in here that can either get you in trouble or get you even kicked out of a tournament if you don't do them correctly. So I would highly recommend reading this through before you go to any Itc events. With that said, the purpose of this is basically just to make all of these little things that have like a gray area that's trying to make them black and white, so you know exactly how it's supposed to be, how it's supposed to work. So for example, most people, when you're playing a game of Warhammer 40k, if you roll a dice and the dice falls off the table, 99.9% of people will assume that that dice is void and you should just re-roll another one, and it only counts if it lands on the table. But there is no actual rule for that. So if someone wanted to be that guy, or a whack player, win it all cost player, if they rolled a dice and it landed on the floor but it was a 6, like something that they needed, they could still be like, oh, well, I rolled a 6, because there's no rule saying that dice that fell off the table didn't count. So this is what this whole thing is mainly for, is just getting rid of that gray area. It's saying what does count and what doesn't count. So some people might think that this wasn't needed, and to be honest, it's not needed if both players are decent human beings, but we do have some whack players in the community, and yeah, so these changes and these confirmations of how these situations are supposed to be played were kind of needed, in my opinion. So anyways, let's go over it, and let's do a summary of it, because again, I don't want to take an hour just reading these things. So anyways, the Itc Judging Philosophy, they basically say here that judges are there to make sure that the game is played accurately and that it's fun for everybody, and also that players should do their best to stay within the rules of the game and try to make it fun for everybody while also still keeping competitive integrity. And that's basically it. Again, you can read all this yourself if you want, but that's basically it. Just says stuff like judges can actively officiate the core rules if they see something's going wrong. So if someone's doing their measurements wrong, or their dice rolls are wrong, or their deployment or whatever, then the judge can step in and be like, hey, you're doing this wrong, you got to do it differently. So yeah, that's all this is really saying is, yeah. Then the spirit of the game, they're basically just saying they want the game to be a competitive game that doesn't go against the spirit of the hobby, which is to have a fun, competitive game for everybody. For the ITC, the game of Warhammer 40k is about sporting competition between two individuals. Any actions that are unsportsmanlike are not within the spirit of the game. So that's what they're talking about the spirit of the game. Just be sportsmanlike and be competitive. That's it. Or be competitive while keeping it sportsmanlike. So game state. Now here's where all the big changes are, and again I'm just going to kind of summarize them. But yeah, so anyways, players must announce their intent to roll a dice and apply the outcome. Their opponent must be responsible for listening. Any dice rolled without an announced intent may be ruled as void by a present judge, and a player must re-roll it. So if you're going to advance a unit, say, I am going to advance this unit of cultists, and then point over their head just to make sure you get the intent crossed. Because it's very hard for your opponent for you and your opponent to have a miscommunication if you point at the unit and give its name, because then there's no way, unless your opponent is purposely trying to not pay attention, then that's how it's going to go. But it even says here that your opponent is responsible for listening. So if your opponent is purposely not trying to listen and stuff, then that's on them. So yeah, so now you have to, it is official. You have to declare what you're doing with your dice, and if you don't, then you have to then go back in time. The roll was void and you have to redo it. So I like this change. Well, it's not even a change. I just like them saying that it's black and white now. That's how it works. You have to declare your intent and then roll. You can't just roll and then declare your intent, because you can game the system too much that way. And then here's a big one. Here's a really big one that I kind of like. So basically, to summarize this, is we're now playing chess. If you start moving a unit, you can't go back and try to move a different unit instead. As soon as you put your hands on a unit and start moving it, you have to move that unit and finish moving it, and there's no going back. I like this change because too many times people would like move a unit, then move another one, be like, actually I want this one to go back a little bit farther, I want this one to go a little bit farther over here, and then sometimes they get some extra inches of movement out of it because you don't really remember where that unit originally started. But yeah, once you move a unit, that's it. Once you start moving a unit, that's it. You have to finish moving it, and that's it. So we're playing like chess now. As soon as you touch a model, you have to move that model, and then move on to the next unit. That's it. So I like this change. It's very, again, all of these changes are just to make the game black and white, so you can tell exactly how it's supposed to be played. So yeah, just think of it like chess now. If you touch one of your models, you have to move that model, and then go on to everything else. And if you decide, oh, well, I don't want to move this model, even after you touched it or quote-unquote activated it, well, guess what? You're not moving that unit for the whole turn. And that goes into something else later, which we'll get into. So here's another change, which kind of goes into this change, is you may not touch or interact with any models that are currently active in the game unless you announce the intent to interact with that game state, such as charging, removing casualties, etc. When a model is placed in a precarious position, a player may adjust a model's position slightly to avoid falling, but this must be declared first with the opponent's verbal authorization of acceptance. So if you want to move a model because it might fall or break or something, and your opponent goes, no, you got to leave it where it is, well, guess what? You got to leave it where it is. And that kind of sucks, but I can kind of see the point of this too, because measurements are very, very important in competitive, and that half an inch or a quarter of an inch can be the difference between making a charge and failing a charge, and that charge itself can be the difference between winning a game and losing a game. So you kind of want models to be exactly where they're meant to be, because then there's no guessing like when you go to measure stuff. So I kind of like this change, I kind of don't, but that's just how it is now. So yeah, whenever you go to move a model, you have to give your intent for it, and after you're done moving them, there's no moving them again unless your opponent like agrees to it, and if your opponent says no, then that's perfectly fine. Like the example I gave earlier, dice that do not land on the playing surface, dice such as dice that land on the floor, do not count for game purposes and must be rolled again. Most decent people always like went by this rule, but I'm sure there was some whack players out there that would be like, yeah, I rolled a 6, it doesn't matter that it's on the floor, I technically rolled it, so I get my 6-inch advance or whatever it is that they were looking for. So this just makes it black and white. If your dice don't land on the table, they don't count. A player must bring an official copy, digital or printed, blah 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 blah. So basically this is just saying you need your codex, whether it's a digital codex or an actual book codex, you need your codex for your rules. They will not be accepting third-party list applications or unofficial printouts of the rules. And the reason being is because these can easily be altered. Sometimes there's rules that are wrong on Battlescribe, and also you can easily alter stuff if you print it out yourself. You can like Photoshop it to make rules look a little different. I highly doubt that there were that many people that tried to game the system that much or even at all, but I mean, just because it could happen, this is now a rule, so that way you need your official rules with you, because then there's no, like, you can't, it's hard to really doctor an official codex. So yeah, that's what this is, and that's what it's for. Just make sure to have your rules with you when you go to the LVO or any ITC event. This is a big one. Verbal agreements between players that alter the rules, interpretation of rules, or blah 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 blah. Basically, what it's saying is if you have an agreement with your opponent. So like at the beginning of every one of my games, I say I like to play by intent. If I say that my intention is to be 3 inches off of this objective so that I'm still holding it, that's my intention, and me and my opponent should both count as if he's 3 inches. Unless obviously I put him 3.5 inches away, then we should push him a little bit closer to make it as close to 3 inches as possible. But you just play by intent like that because it makes the game faster, and also because sometimes you might shake the table or something and your guy might move a little bit farther away and might be like a few millimeters away from 3 inches or something. So playing by intent is usually good. But this is saying if you plan on making any of these verbal agreements between you and your opponent, you now have to get a judge to actually see it. You need the third party, wherever it says, you need a third party to witness such agreements. So that way you don't get something happening like what happened at the last LVO, where both players agreed to play by intent, but then in the second round, one player went to go deep strike his guys first after saying, I'm doing this first so we can get it over quick and then I'm going to move the rest of my guys. And then his opponent ended up saying, after he was finished deep striking, he's like, no, you don't get to move the rest of your army because deep striking happens at the end of the turn. So that player went back on the playing by intent. But now if a judge sees this and sees that that player went back on playing by the verbal agreement that was made, they can be given a foul. So I like this change, but I don't like it because if people were all decent human beings, we wouldn't need this change. But some people are win at all costs, so you kind of need this change. And again, anything that just makes it black and white for how it should be done and how it shouldn't be done, I like that because then there's less disagreements and less arguments over it. Any measurement must be acknowledged by the opponent or accepted. So what this is basically saying is, let's say your opponent has a charge and they measure it and it's a 9-inch charge, but then you measure it and you're like, no, it's a 10-inch charge. You guys have a little bit of a back and forth, you remeasure a little bit a couple times, then you finally come to a conclusion and say, okay, it's a 9-inch charge. Well, now if they roll their charge and it's an 8, and then that player goes back and goes, oh, actually I think it's an 8-inch charge. Nope, it doesn't matter. You both agreed that it was a 9-inch charge. That's what it was. There's no going back. There's no remeasuring. That's it. If you both agree that the distance, it works, you cannot go back afterwards and say, oh, actually, it was a different distance. So this is, again, just making it black and white. So if you and your opponent agree on something, then that agreement sticks. There's no going back and trying to fight through it afterwards. So I actually really like that change. So now whenever your opponent does go to make a charge or something, just measure their thing and have an agreement with them. Okay, I do agree with you, that's a 9-inch charge. I don't agree with you, that's a 10-inch charge, blah, 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 blah. And then of course, if you can't come to an agreement, you call a judge over and the judge will measure it and what he says is final, which is something it said earlier in the judge part, or it might say it later, but whatever a judge says, that's the final decision. There's no arguing with them. And if you do argue with a judge, well, you're probably going to get into a lot of trouble, and I think that's actually later down down here somewhere. So each player must endeavor to complete his or her time in a timely and efficient manner. Basically what this is saying, don't slow play. If you're found slow playing because it gives you a tactical advantage, then you will have committed a foul. So just don't slow play. Try to play the game in an appropriate and time efficient manner so that way both players can finish out their turns and you can actually finish the game. Because some people don't realize how slow they're playing. So yeah, just be aware of yourself, be self-aware of how much time you're actually taking with your turn, and try to make it fair for your opponent. Nobody should get more time than the other person. So yeah, just try to do your turn in a timely manner. That's basically all it's saying. Other than a judge, no third party may physically interact with models or dice. So basically, only the 2 players playing the game can interact with models on the table, or a judge. Other than that, if anybody else comes around and moves a model or something like that, then someone's going to end up getting a foul. So yeah, just only touch the models that are in your game, and even then, just only touch your own models. Let your opponent touch their models because you don't want any problems that way. But yeah, this is again just making it black and white. It's just the two players playing and a judge that can actually touch stuff. Now here's a big one that can actually be gamed pretty much, or gamed pretty big. So I kind of like this change, but I actually kind of don't like it because again, from a win-at-all-cost player's perspective, this can actually give some power to the win-at-all-cost player. So persistent buffs and debuffs from stratagems or psychic powers should be clearly marked with a card or token when being applied to a particular unit. So for example, let's say you gave a unit Delightful Agonies that gives a Slanesh unit a 5-up Feel No Pain. Well, now you have to indicate with a marker of some sort that they have Delightful Agonies. And because you have to indicate it, if you don't, when it comes to your opponent's turn and they start shooting at that unit and you say that they have Delightful Agonies, well, if you didn't mark it, well, your opponent can call you out on it now and be like, sorry, they're not marked, they don't get their spell. That's why I kind of don't like this change, or this implementation, I guess you can say, is because it can be gamed by whack players. But at the same time, it's also good because then there's there's going to be no arguments about it of like, oh, I thought you put it on that other unit, or I thought you put it on this unit. Now just make sure that you have like the right cards and stuff. Buy the psychic cards that have the spells and just put it down beside the unit. There you go, problem solved. So just remember to actually mark the units that you buff or debuff. Otherwise your opponent, if they're a whack player, can argue the fact that they're not buffed or debuffed because there's nothing marking it. So yeah, that's an important change that you guys should remember. So if you buff or debuff a unit, make sure to mark it. Then we have the time. It just talks about game time, when you should stop, when you shouldn't stop. I'm going to skip over this. You guys can read it yourself if you want. But yeah, that's basically it. It's just talking about how to play a game efficiently. If a judge calls for hard dice down, then that means the game immediately ends. There's no more rolling. And if you willfully ignore this, you may have committed a foul. So again, just read all this, make sure to understand it, because you could get in trouble for trying to play a game that should be finished, even though it might not seem fair, blah blah blah. That's how it is. That's how it's going to be. So yeah, make sure to read this. Now this goes on lists. These are basic guidelines for lists in ITC events. Each event may have additional or different requirements for list submission and format. It is ultimately the player's responsibility to adhere to the list requirements for an event or face a penalty. For example, LVO 2018, well, I'm assuming they say 2019, has a set of requirements for list submission that are set forth by the LVO and Best Coast pairings. In general, it is each player's responsibility to bring a clear and legible printed copy of his or her list to an event. This list may be different in format from the one submitted online with the Best Coast pairings app. The list formatting must include the total points of the army, the total points of each individual unit, and the disaggregation of points for each upgrade available to each unit. Command points and detachment must also be clearly delineated. I don't know all these big words. I feel dumb. For the purposes of reserves, each unit must also have its power level rating clearly ranked. I don't know why this is a thing anymore, because with the last FAQ they changed it to be points, so power level really doesn't have anything to do in the game anymore. But maybe they wrote this before the power level change and just forgot to take it out. I don't know. Anyways, the army's warlord must be clearly identified, as should its warlord trait if it is fixed, such as was the special character. Chapter tactics and special detachment benefits must also be clearly identified for each detachment. Blah 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 blah. Basically what it's trying to say is there shouldn't be any gotcha moments when your opponent finds out your whole army is -1 to hit. There also shouldn't be any gotcha moments when your opponent finds out like, oh yeah, that unit that was on your sheet, it actually has like a giant cannon thing that I didn't know about. So this is just trying to make it as black and white as possible. Your list should have everything about it in there, so your opponent doesn't have to like fully like look through your army and your list at the same time. Everything should match up. I kind of like this change. I kind of don't. It also says somewhere around here that by the end of round 1 of an event, every player must have his or her army list uploaded to the Best Coast pairings application. So no longer are the days of not uploading your list because you don't want your opponent of the next round to be able to like see your list and prepare for it before your round starts. Now you have to upload your list to Best Coast pairings by the end of the first round. If you do not, then you are going to get in trouble. I don't know how you're going to get in trouble, but yeah. And then they have an exception here. This may not be feasible for all events due to technology or internet connectivity issues, blah, 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 blah. Also, if for some reason you're living in the Stone Age and you don't have a smartphone and you can't upload your list, you're supposed to go to the tournament organizer and get them to upload your list. So they even say that players are responsible for ensuring blah, 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 whether manually or through judges. So yeah, if you don't have a phone and you can't can't do it, or maybe you don't have a data plan or something, then yeah, you have to go to the judge to get it uploaded by the end of round 1. They also say stuff like any model or unit presented in a player's list or that is not on the player's list may not enter the table at any time. So if you forget to put a unit in your list, you can't play with that unit. Units that are summoned during the game are accounted for in the list by missing points. If the it's the player's responsibility to explain why the points are missing and how they can be used to summon units. So you got to be upfront about that. You can't have a gotcha moment where it's like, ah, I summoned a bloodthirster, and your opponent's just like, holy shit, I didn't know that was even possible. Similarly, some units are created in the game, such as spore mines. These do not need to be accounted for. So units like that don't need to be accounted for. But stuff in your list, apparently if you're missing 1,000 points in your list, you have to explain to your opponent every unit that you could possibly summon. Which basically at that point you just be like, yeah, I could summon pretty much anything from the Chaos Demons Codex. That's the best way I would get it done, otherwise you'd be talking about a bunch of units all game. Variable powers, any player using war gear that's not clearly identified in the list will commit a foul. This is another big one because at a tournament last year, or during this year, someone was playing their list as if they had a plasma pistol when it wasn't actually written on their list. I think they might even actually had the points right for it as if it was there. They just didn't actually put the plasma pistol on their list. And this caused a lot of controversy and problems for that person and even got their team kicked out of the event. So now if you don't have a plasma pistol written anywhere on your list, well guess what? You can't use the plasma pistol. I think that's pretty fair. So yeah, like I said, if you're using anything in your list, just make sure it's written down, you have the points for it and everything. It's going to be a lot of bookkeeping at the beginning of the event, but it's going to make things easier for everyone. You won't be accused of cheating, and yeah, I think I think all of these changes are actually good. Although, again, if you were a decent human being, and if everyone was a decent human being, we wouldn't need these, but whack players do exist, and we needed to make these very black and white for everybody, so now there's that. Whenever a player uses a stratagem or an ability over the course of play, they must, if asked, clearly read the entire rule or present the written rule in its entirety to their opponent the first time asked. So there's no more just vaguely saying like, yeah, I have a stratagem that gives my unit deep strike. You have to actually explain them word for word what the stratagem says if they ask. And then after that we get to the decorum, which is basically a bunch of stuff that shouldn't happen, which unfortunately does happen. So let's just go over this real quick, and I think we're gonna call it the end because I don't feel like going over all of this stuff. You guys can all do that yourself. I've covered the gist of it. You guys get the idea. There's a lot of changes and stuff. Basically just saying like what you're allowed to do, what you can't do, what constitutes a foul, what's fair play, all that kind of stuff. They just made everything black and white instead of having like a bunch of gray areas where people could rules lawyer their way out of it and stuff like that. A player may never use mocking, abusive, vulgar, or derogatory language towards another player or staff in an event. Any player who uses such language has committed a foul. And then here's a big one. A player may never physically threaten or use physical violence towards another player or staff at an event. Any player who threatens or performs physical violence has committed a red card foul and will be removed from the event, and will be denied earning points at further ITC events for a period of time, determined by the sole discretion of the ITC administrative staff. First off, if you're threatening to hit somebody or hurt somebody over a game of toy soldiers, you got some issues and you need to work on those. Because there should never be a point where you get angry enough to physically threaten someone over a game of Warhammer 40k. So that's not allowed. And if you do that, you're removed from the event, and then on top of that, you may not even be able to attend, or you will be able to attend other ITC events, but you're not going to get any points for it or anything like that. And it also says later on down here somewhere that there's basically, for penalties, there's going to be a list of people that are actually blacklisted from all ITC events. So if you get in trouble enough, you can actually banned from the ITC in general. So it's not just being banned from one event. You can be banned from the ITC, which means you can't go to other events and stuff. A player may never purposely destroy property of theirs or otherwise at an event. Any player who purposely destroys property has committed a red card foul. So if you do either of those two things that I talked about, so either threatening to physically harm somebody or threatening to break somebody's models because you got angry during a game of toy soldiers, then you seriously need to reevaluate your life and yourself, and maybe you should look into getting some treatment for your anger issues, because there is no situation ever that requires you to get to that level of anger where you threaten to hurt somebody or break their stuff. That just shouldn't happen. And I'm glad the ITC is actually taking a stance on this and willing to ban people from the ITC and all events in general, because yeah, that kind of action shouldn't be tolerated. So I'm glad the ITC is actually putting in a penalty for this kind of action now. A player may never purposely deceive a player, so these are where gotcha moments come in, whether by malicious misinformation, incomplete information, or vaguely stated information. A player who purposely deceives or attempts to deceive another player will have committed a foul. Any pattern of quote-unquote accidental deception or misinformation can be considered a foul based on the judge's discretion. So yeah, if opponent asks something like what a stratagem does, tell them word for word what it does, because you can get in trouble. Also, originally, you should have been doing this anyways, because gotcha moments are kind of bullshit. Don't deceive people or lie about rules and stuff like that, because most people are going to take your word for it. And if you do deceive people or lie about your rules more than once, you're going to get in a lot of trouble for it. And again, if you do all of this stuff enough, you can possibly be banned from the ITC as a whole. So yeah, just tell people how your stuff works. That's it. A player may never give nor accept help in a game in which they are not an active participant. If they do so, they have committed a foul. So when two people are playing a game, you can't have your friend helping them. And if they do, then your friend is committing a foul, while you yourself, from accepting it, is also committing a foul. I like this because the competition, especially in that one game, is between those two players. It's not between one player and a group of friends. You know what I mean? It's two players battling it out, so that it should stay between those two players. And then yeah, just some stuff about slow play, blah 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 blah, and that's it. Tools, it talks about the different dice and stuff. Basically, don't bring loaded dice. Players coming to the table with a reasonable explanation to clearly read and understand their opponent's dice. If you're using dice your opponent can't understand, then you may be asked to use different dice, which I agree with, because some dice are kind of dumb and don't really have like numbers on them, or they have like symbols for everything that can be interpreted different ways. So yeah, just bring dice that are easily readable to both people. That's basically it. Dice apps used at the event that are not official Games Workshop products must be approved by the event organizers before being used. So dice apps, basically what this is saying is if you're using the Games Workshop dice app, which is official, then that's okay. If you're using any other dice apps, it has to be approved by the event organizer, which I completely agree with. The Games Workshop official dice app is actually pretty good. So for those of you who play horde armies, or armies that require you to roll a bunch of dice, then I suggest picking up the official Games Workshop app. I'm pretty sure it's only like $1 or something. It's definitely worth it. Measuring instruments must be accurate, so don't bring a measuring stick that has wrong measurements. Make sure that you're doing it correctly, blah blah blah. Any clocks for timekeeping, blah blah blah, must be accurate, blah 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 blah. Just more stuff that's just making it black and white. Most of these rules are really just here for whack players who are willing to cheat the system to try to gain unfair advantages. That's really all these rules are trying to stop people from being whack players. That's it. Then it goes into calling judges and how judges are supposed to treat situations. Basically what it boils down to is when a judge calls something, that judge, even if that judge's ruling is incorrect, you have to go with that judge's ruling, which I kind of agree with and I kind of disagree with. I mainly agree with it because if the judges don't have that kind of power, then what's the point of even having judges? So if a judge comes and gives you, if you two have a dispute, like again when I said earlier about the charge distance thing, if one of you thinks it's 8 inches and the other one thinks it's 9, and the judge comes in and says it's 9 inches, well that charge is 9 inches, no ifs, ands, or buts, you go with what the judge says. So yeah, there's a little bit more to it, but I'm not going to go over everything. But yeah, that's basically it. So the rules with calling judges. And then here's the penalties. It goes over a lot of stuff, which I'm not going to get into. But basically, just what it boils down to is you can get in trouble with stuff of being docked points, or being kicked out of the event, or being banned from the ITC altogether. So yeah, read these. Make sure you follow within the rules and you don't get in trouble, because there is some pretty severe consequences if you are a whack player and you're trying to game the system. And that's pretty much it. So yeah, overall, I think all of these rules weren't necessarily needed, but in a world where there are whack players who will do anything to try to win the game, which includes like cheating or rules lawyering things that shouldn't be rules lawyered, or just all those types of things. Well, now we have black and white answers for all of them, So now we shouldn't get any of those situations popping up, and if they do, well then we have the proper ways of dealing with that. We have answers to everything here. So yeah, I like these changes. It was mainly for all the whack players out there. If you're just a casual player and played normally, then none of these changes really affect you, although some of them do, especially like the thing where it said you now have to announce your intent and everything. Like, I'm sure most people did that anyways, but now it's just black and white, you have to do that. So yeah, that's all the changes. That's everything. If I forgot anything, I'll put it down in the comments. But yeah, that was the terrain changes, and that was the Itc Code of Conduct that is being implemented for mainly all of the Itc events following the LVO and at the LVO itself. So yeah, that's going to be it for this video. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments of this video, because I would really like to know what you guys have to say about all this stuff, whether you disagree with them, whether you agree with them, and yeah, I would love to know all that stuff. Also, don't forget to check out the channel's other sponsor, which is 9.5 Miniature Painting. You can find him on Instagram. He does some great commission jobs. He actually does a lot of my painting for me, and I've been happy with everything that he's done. It's really high quality, and he does it for a good price too. So yeah, if you want to check him out, there'll be a link in the description. And yeah, send him a message on Instagram and get some commissions done for you. So yeah, again, thanks for watching the video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I will see you in the next one. Happy wargaming.